Good evening, everybody. It's great to see so many new faces and some of our friends who have been over the past. This is our third and at least final public meeting that the BID is hosting regarding the issue of parking at certain designated areas within the Fishtown, Kensington area business improvement district. Before we get into a little bit of a background and a little bit of a procedural history of where we've been, and then certainly have the lovely and talented Ann O'Neill from the Parking Authority lead us through some of the studies that have been done. I just wanted to give a little bit of the procedure. We're sort of running this as council does. You will be muted throughout this meeting, so during the Q&A with the PPA. And then we're going to give you 2 minutes, each of you, to make a statement. If there's a question, we'll try to do the best we can to answer it. The goal, as we've been doing with all of these meetings, again, this is the third in this initial series, is we're recording this meeting and then we're providing all of your comments to our elected officials and as well as the Philadelphia Parking Authority. We understand, certainly this is a delicate subject for a lot. I wish there was an easy solution to some of the problems that we face. Certainly since I've been here in January of 2020 to come work for the BID, and then I became a resident not long thereafter, you know, you certainly get a good eyeful of what we see and what we're lucky.
Our affiliate WBN, FaceTime.
There we go. One of the things we see pretty quickly, which is a lot of wonderful development, both commercial and residential density that continues to grow, not just on Frankfurt, but Frankfurt, from York down to Lehigh, Girard, and Front Street. And with that increase, we face an even heavier burden on our burdened parking infrastructure, or maybe lack thereof. And one of the things that was certainly obvious to me, and as I was tasked by our board to help try to find some relief, was twofold. Certainly people that come here, whether they're coming to eat, shop, work, what have you, at certain parts of the corridor, if you're coming, certainly coming to shop and patronize, the lack of turnover may cause you to get frustrated and leave. Thereby a business loses, necessary income. Or even the more important part is what a lot of people do is they then go park on our residential streets. And that takes parking away from the people that live there. So what actually, before even this organization began, a study was done on Frankfurt Avenue from, I believe, Allen Street to Jefferson in 2016 that made recommendations that we're going to go through today. Then as we began this process, the Parking Authority did a study again back in April and May of 2021, which confirmed more than ever that we have a parking problem and provided recommendations to that. So we're going to have Ann shortly and I go through the reports with everyone. Please be patient, take your notes, and then we'll make sure we call on you at that particular time. As a background, this is certainly not the first meeting that we've had or has been had on the subject, at least from the BID's perspective.
A meeting, or this is a Fishtown business district.
Again, if we could keep everybody muted, that would be great.
Oh God, sorry. Thought I was muted.
Thank you, appreciate it. We first started on February 19th of 2021. After meetings that we had with elected officials and the PPA, we had a full transportation meeting where we had representatives not only from the PPA, but SEPTA, PennDOT, Streets Department, Planning Commission, to talk about all of the issues that we face. And at that time, we began that discussion of what regulations could mean and how they would look. Since there was not a current study, the Parking Authority then undertook another study, which happened on back in April and May of 2021, excuse me. And on December 4th of 2021, we had an additional or second meeting, which was in the evening. to go specifically talk about parking and the recommendations that we fix. Since then, the Fishtown Business Improvement District issued a prepared and forwarded a parking study or survey to kind of get feedback from a lot of our stakeholders, which we mailed to them. And also we made sure to post on all social media platforms so that everybody could answer. Those results were also forwarded to our elected officials at the PPA. As some time has now expired since our last December meeting, we felt it'd be the best that we had a series of meetings to make sure that everybody was up to date with what we're discussing and what recommendations have been made jointly currently by the Fishtown Business Improvement District and the prior two boards of the Fishtown Neighbors Association, which I will make sure to get into before we conclude. Having said that, I want to jump right in and introduce Ann O'Neill from the Philadelphia Parking Authority. Good evening, Ann, again. Welcome
Mark.
back.
How are
Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thanks for having me.
Ann, can you tell your position over at the PPA?
So I am the manager for plan and analysis, and we oversee all the regular parking regulations for Philadelphia.
And you were involved when the bid asked for a updated parking survey of the areas that I guess were Allen to Jefferson on Frankfurt and Front to Marlborough on East Girard in 2021. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And we're looking at the first page of that study there. If we can go to Kay there we go. And can you tell a little bit to our listeners or viewers today, what was the objective as far as you understood it?
So the parking study went from April 27th to May 15th to analyze parking trends on Frankfurt Ave and Girard Ave. It was a comprehensive study, which we were looking at turnover and occupancy rate. The surveys were conducted on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday during 3 time frames, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., 2 p.m. to 6 p.m., and 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. And a total of 9 surveys were conducted on each day.
And so it looks like a total of 18 surveys were done per week.
That's correct.
And there were 2 areas that were that the East Girard area and Frankfurt Avenue area that I discussed.
Yep.
And to your knowledge, were those areas chosen because of, I believe they were done by request, correct?
That is correct. We were asked by, the Fishtown Business Association to conduct this comprehensive survey.
And if we could turn to the next page, Kay. That's lovely Kay Anderson, our Director of Operations. Thank you, Kay. In going through the statistics and how you did it, it's important to note what it is, what categories you look for. And it looks like there were 3: parking spaces, safety spaces, and courtesy spaces. Can you tell everyone what those are?
So the courtesy spaces would be loading zones, package delivery, passenger loading zones, and truck loading zones. And the safety spaces would be like no stopping, corner clearances, blocking driveways.
Gotcha. And to be clear, I know, because I know this has come up in other meetings. You're looking at, when you're counting, are you counting spaces or are you counting cars, or both?
It's both.
It's both.
Mhm.
Okay. So when you're counting cars, can you tell a little bit of what it is you're looking at and what are you reporting on?
So we're seeing how long, if there's vehicles there that we witness, we take down the tag, we go by, we wait an hour, we come back to see if they are still in the same location. We do that, as I said, 3 times, like in a 3 time frame. So the time frames that I did say, they go 4 times around every hour for 4 hours, checking these tags and seeing what the occupancy rate, seeing what turnover they're having, and so on.
Gotcha. But was this the same method that was used for to your knowledge, the 2016 survey of
Correct.
Frankfurt Avenue?
Yes.
Gotcha. Chef K, if you could scroll down. And the next couple pages, you'll see just some terms that are used throughout the study, correct, Dan?
That's right.
So when we get to the findings page, right on the first sentence there, it says, given the Fishtown Business Corridor is almost entirely unregulated, it would stand to reason that there is a scarcity of open parking available at any given time. And then you go a little bit, and the charts will kind of flush it out by block, but you talk about the occupancy rates for Frankfurt Avenue and Girard Avenue. Could you illuminate that a little bit for everyone?
So if you look at the 1200 block of Frankfurt Ave, so it's saying that the occupancy rate is 92%, which is pretty high for that means that cars were not moving. They were sitting there the whole time.
Got it. And it looks like in the top of the findings, it said for, I guess this is total for the Frankfurt Avenue area. Again,
Right.
Allen to Jefferson. The occupancy rate was 86%.
Yes, 86% it was.
And the total cumulative percentage was 88% for that East Girard area,
Correct.
Marlboro to Front.
Mhm.
Is there an area in your investigations or that the PPA looks for in its studies that an occupancy rate that says to you regulations are needed?
So usually for occupancy, we usually look at like an 75 to 85%. And
To
as
have
you can see,
regulations.
an average, and as you can see, most of them hit that.
And then it looked, what's funny, the next sentence said, conversely, the two locations that have hourly parking regulations, and it says Unit West Girard Avenue, East Side, and 200 East Girard Avenue, East Side, saw a smaller percentage of
Right.
spaces occupied, 72% and 58%. Was that because of the regulations?
Right, and there's more of a turnover there.
Now, on the next page, you go into a little bit of turnover percentage.
Mhm.
And it looks like there you found a total turnover percentage for the Frankfurt Avenue portion and Girard, if you could describe.
So the turnover percentage was, as you say, was 14% for Frankfurt Ave, and then it was 18% for Girard Ave. And so, I mean, like you've already just showed that there was a difference in those small spaces that were regulated. As you can see by the numbers there, the 20 to 30% in the turnover percentages on the two locations.
And when you're looking at turnover rates or ratios, just like we talked about with occupancy, is there, I guess, a number that you're looking to have or to have maintained to have regular parking for folks? Or let me phrase it another way. Is there a number of percentage that that is low enough that you think regulations are needed?
Well, as you can see, like from the Frankfurt Ave, I mean, the vacancy rate, the turnover is not happening on the 1200 block, 1400 block of Frankfurt Ave. There's really no turnover rate whatsoever. 1300, it's 6% the turnover rate.
And you
That's
kind of,
vacant.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
We're talking about vacancy, which it was
Sure.
only 6%.
And it kind of goes without saying, it says that the last sentence is, the answer of why is clear, regulated parking creates turnover. By the way, before we kind of get into the recommendations that were made here, when any type of regulations are implemented, is the PPA the agency in the city of Philadelphia that is entrusted to both perform the study and then ultimately carry it out?
Meaning, are we the ones who install the regulations?
Well, do the study first.
We do the study first, and if we get a letter from the city council, the council people that have those areas, and also a letter from, we hope, from the business association and the community, the neighborhood association also. And what happens if it is agreed upon to go ahead and install these regulations, it would be for an 8-month trial basis. So it would be kind of considered like a pilot.
Great, great. If we can flip to the recommendations part, certainly we've been making this study certainly available since it was done back in 2021. Certainly we're happy to make sure people see that because there is a lot of detail and statistics in here. So when we get to your recommendations page, starts out by saying, needless to say, some course of action needs to take place. And looks like 2 recommendations were made. If you could amplify those for everyone.
So the 2 options were, so the first one was we could install meter parking zones during the daytime. That becomes residential permit parking in the evening and overnight hours. For instance, the locations could be posted for 2-hour meter parking from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. or even up to 10 p.m. And then 2-hour residential permit parking from 8 p.m. or 10 p.m. until 8 a.m. This would give patrons of the businesses easier access to parking during the day, and residents would be able to take those spaces in the evening hours. This would be like the parking regulations. We have these regulations over on Washington Ave and Broad Street, South Broad, right there in South Philly. And it seems to be working over there. It seems beneficial to the residents and the businesses in the area. And then option 2 would be to have 3-hour meter parking from 8 a.m. until 12 a.m. and have residential permit parking override, which means any resident that has a valid residential permit parking may park in the zone without paying the meter.
And can you describe for everybody, I know we've gone through this many times before, what the cost of the residential parking permit is?
So it's an annual fee. So for the annual fee for a residential permit parking pass would be, for the first vehicle would be $35. For the second vehicle in the household would be $50. The third vehicle would be $75. And 4 or more would be $100.
Got it. And it's paid once a year.
Yes, it's an annual fee.
And in order to be able to ensure that you can override any regulations, the residential car would have to be parked within a certain zone or district, right? Is that how the city breaks it up?
Right.
And I believe ours is for, someone said before, I
25
think for
and 10.
19125.
So, well, it goes district, your district on the south side of Girard Ave would be District 10, and on the north side of Girard Ave, it would be District 25.
Understood. Now, some of the questions have come up whether this would be metered kiosk or whether we could, if regulations were implemented, this could be done without either of those. Could you describe the differences?
So if we go ahead and if we do the meter, you can, of course, you can pay as if you wanted to stay longer than 2 hours. But if we go ahead and not install the meters and just do a timing, if we do if we do the 2-hour, the vehicle would be timed for 2 hours, but then it would have to leave the location.
Understood. Lastly, one of the things that's certainly been an issue here is loading zones or maybe lack thereof. And looks like in your recommendations, there were certain ideas put out for more loading zones, if you could describe.
Yeah, so it also benefit to have several 30-minute loading zones installed in the car. Loading zones tend to only be occupied at a rate of approximately 50% due to the Carter having several businesses of the grab and go nature. Placing a few loading zones outside would give these businesses access to much needed turnover.
Understood. And I believe the rest of the report, if I'm correct, is really just goes through a lot of really the specifics of the study. Cars counted, spaces counted, etc. Am I right? And
Yes,
okay.
that's why I apologize. I didn't know you were asking me the question. Sorry.
One thing too, one of the things that I know has come up in other meetings too, we know there's a residential parking permit that can override any regulations for that area. Is there such a thing for employees, workers?
There is not. There is no legislation for permit parking for businesses.
So in order for that to happen, an ordinance would have to be entered and approved by city council and the mayor.
That is correct.
And just before we get into our 2016 report, and by the way, in this report, we've discussed numerous times, there's also for lack of a better term, a PPA parking lot at 1300 Frankfurt Avenue. Am I
Right.
correct?
That is correct. Is that right off of Shack Max and Thompson area? Right there?
Yes.
Mhm.
And there's no regulations on that small lot as well, right?
There is not. There might be, I'm pretty sure there's a car share that might be on the location.
Okay. But in this study, that was not surveyed, correct?
Right, we weren't requested to study that.
But in 2016, that was.
We were, yes.
Okay. Before I even get to ours, if Kay, if you could pull the 2016 report, that would be great. And while we're waiting, and thank you, Kay, for doing that, this was basically done pre-pandemic, pre-business improvement district. I believe it was from a business association request, pre-streetering. So it's an interesting contrast and something to look at. Were the boundaries on Frankfurt Avenue, as we're looking at the report, the same, Ann?
They were the same. Yes.
But in Girard Avenue was not studied in that.
It was not studied.
Okay. And in looking at the unregulated area, it speaks to, kind of goes into a little details, and it says here, vehicles are parking over 2 to 3 hours after the initial visit. Drivers also park their cars on Frankfurt Avenue and take public transportation. Under these circumstances, vehicles stay for a long duration, and the prospects to have available parking spaces for business customers are unattainable. Does that coincide with the study we just went over for 2021?
It pretty much is. Pretty much.
You make mention here, though, I don't think anybody's going to be too into an 1100 block of Frankfurt for a motorcycle or scooter zone. Can you tell me what that route was?
So that was just some recommendation. We said it could work down there. The only way though it would work is if you did go with the meter park and where we would install a kiosk, because it's a paid zone. And this is for only motorcycle and scooter vehicles.
Gotcha. And if we turn to the next page. We get through the recommendations. I don't want to read to everybody, but this one's kind of broken down kind of block by block, right? It starts with the 1000 block of Frankfurt and goes. Not to read to everybody, but on each of the, can you kind of give a summary of what you see there from the 1000 block of Frankfurt, and also it goes through 1200 to 1400 block?
So it's kind of similar what you were saying about people just parking their car and taking public transportation, leaving them there all day until they're finished work and then coming back. That's why at this point, went ahead and said, for meter parking to be placed there, once again, you would receive that turnover. I mean, the recommendations are pretty similar to the recommendations we're making in the newer survey.
Sure, and because it makes mention in both paragraphs regarding 3-hour parking Monday through Sunday. If we could go to the next page, I know this is always, there you go. The second paragraph, and it talks about that PPA lot that we discussed. And it says that the occupancy rate there is 95%. And this was on the Saturday and Thursdays that were tested. Can you see what the recommendation is regarding regulations for the lot?
So if we want turnover in there, as you can see, it's always parked up there. So in order to have some kind of turnover there, it would make sense to regulate it if that's, what we're looking at, like if that's what we're looking for out of these surveys, out of these breakdowns.
Sure. And then it ends on the 1400 block. And it actually has that range that you mentioned.
Right.
75 to 82% mentioned
Right.
there. And actually says after 8 a.m., the available parking on the entire Frankfurt Avenue strip is non-existent. So certainly between the two studies as you see them 5 years apart, is there anything that jumps out as you one way or the other?
No, it's pretty similar.
We talked a little bit about what the next steps would be if there were recommendations made and proposed for the pilot program, which again, is 8 months, correct?
That is correct, yeah. So
Can you just describe a little bit of what our residents and business owners and employees and patrons could expect as far as how that process goes, what warnings will be put in place, et cetera?
So we go ahead and once we go ahead and place the regulations, and once they're in place, we would do, I mean, I'm sure Ed Schaefer could, I think I'm answering right, but I think it's an enforcement question. So I think they go for 2 weeks with doing steer clears, which is it's a notice that we place on. We would have a park enforcement officer go to the area and go ahead and place these steer clears, which are warnings to say, you know, we're getting ready to enforce these regulations.
Got it. Ed, is there anything you want to add?
Nah, she explained that perfectly.
Thank you, Ed.
You did great, short and sweet. And as moving forward, certainly this is something that we have engaged, I know, our stakeholders and as many people as we can. We wanted to try to, as much as we could, as far as recommendations, come up with something that would help everyone. So our recommendations, which I know John Geating, president of FNA, is on, he certainly can attest to his board's recommendations, were for regulated parking 3 hours, non-metered, meaning they would simply be timed.
Right.
From 8 a.m. to either midnight or 2 a.m. with the residential parking permit override. We certainly understand and want our residents to be able to park and park affordably and not be subject to tickets. We also wanted to utilize the non-metered because we understand that people are coming to work here and we don't want to punish people by making them pay to go to work. But certainly what we have seen is that, you know, whether you're looking at Girard Avenue with people double parking or just the volume of cars that remain, it was something we thought were best. And just lastly, before we start to open it up, Ann, with loading zones, that's something each particular property or business would individually submit, correct?
That is correct. They would apply for, we have an application that they would, we could send to them and they can fill it out and submit it back to us.
Awesome. And I feel like we've been doing this forever. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having us.
Always. So what we're going to do now, we want to use the remaining time for you, to have a chance for you to be heard. And if we can answer questions, we'll do the best we can. The way we're going to do this is please raise your hand on the Zoom. We'll call on you. You'll have 2 minutes to make your points, etc. Please make sure, as always, we understand that this is an impassioned issue. We have to remember we're all one neighborhood and we're going to respect each other's opinions, whether we agree or disagree, because ultimately we want to try to find a solution that best helps. Having said that, Skip Schwartzman, you have your hand ups, followed by John Geating and Andrew Ortega. Skip, take it away.
Thanks, Mark. I'm one of the 2 people along with my wife. We own a Feast Rise Catering in Front and Palmer, up at Front and Palmer Streets. For those of you who don't know who I am, I just wanted to mention as a BID board member as well that while Ann has said that there doesn't appear to be much difference between 2016 and 2021 in the studies, clearly the population in our neighborhood has increased and is only going to increase further, and that the pressures that prompted the initial study in 2016 before the bid existed by the then business district organization, and then again the 2021 study are only going, those pressures are only going to increase. And without some, it's my opinion that without some type of regulation that affects residents as minimally as possible, and I would say that my preference would be timed but unmetered parking. The residential streets are going to come under more and more pressure as these two main thoroughfares, Frankfurt and Girard, are more heavily used for parking on a long-term basis without being regulated. I do think that there would be some advantage. I don't know if it's the PPA's purview or not to do this, to combine the residential parking zones. I think Ann said it was zones 10 and 25, so that residents could park on either side of the demarcation line between those two zones, which would make life a little bit easier for them. But outside of that, I do think that some kind of control here is necessary. Thanks.
Thank you, Skip. Appreciate it. John Geating, you're up.
Hey, thanks, Mark, and thanks everybody for being here. Yeah, I'm John Geating. I'm the current president of the Fishtown Neighbors Association. Just wanted to weigh in support of the proposed compromise plan. You know, we had two successive F&A boards endorse this, been part of the negotiations around it, and I think it strikes a good balance of trying to balance the competing priorities on Frankfurt Ave. You know, it's pretty clear that there's not enough loading zones. I think that's like the thing that we're seeing all the time, where people are parking in the middle of the street in the drive lane, and you're getting buses backed up behind people, people trying to get to work and other places, stuck behind loading vehicles, or Uber drivers parking up on the sidewalk or in the crosswalks and stuff. I have two little kids who are scootering and biking around, and it's tough to get around those cars safely. And we hear this all the time
I'm
from
gonna
people.
tell your dad.
Hey, excuse me. So I'm parenting here. Anyway, so we endorsed the idea that there needs to be more parking availability. I think that's a trade-off with long-term parking on the corridor. If you want more available spaces, you can't have people parking there for months at a time. So we need more turnover and short-term parking options on the corridor, so that we can have reserve the parking in the neighborhood streets for longer term parking. The other thing is one of our hard lines was we don't want to make overnight parking any harder for people. That's the real pain point here. During the day, a little easier to park on the blocks. At night, that's when it's really a crunch. So we thought this plan addresses that. It's not going to make the overnight parking situation harder, and we need to do something about the loading situation, because it's just with e-commerce and all the businesses and all this stuff, it's just getting so, and so no plan is perfect, but I think on balance this is a good compromise, and we've been debating this forever. We need to move forward. Hoping we can get that done in the next few months here. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. And say hi to your son. Andrew Ortega, you're up. Good to see you, Andy.
Hi, thanks for having me, Mark. I'll read a little prepared statement. I took part in a roundtable discussion of the same variety nearly a year ago. And in that time, the situation on the ground has only gone from bad to worse. From Main Street, Manayunk, South Street, or Ridge Avenue and Roxbury, parking management is a given part of any functioning commercial residential district. The current situation is simply untenable. Residents have overwhelmingly chosen to live in Fishtown, Kensington area, largely because of its walkability. The current situation is in direct opposition to this walkability. Limited car turnover has led directly to extreme double parking, and as a result, numerous auto crashes. This turnover additionally leads to a direct sense of lawlessness with blocked crosswalks, sidewalk parking, and other similar activities the norm. Virtually every bus zone is blocked by illegally parked cars who have no fear of ticketing. Any persons hoping to safely exit or enter a bus must literally climb over parked cars. For anyone doubting the seriousness of this issue, I personally spent more than a year attempting to get an abandoned motorcycle removed from Girard Avenue. While this vehicle sat and rusted, pedestrian safety was continuously put in jeopardy. Walking from end to end of 19125, doing school drop-offs and pickups, what I've seen on a daily basis, this pilot program, in my opinion, is a bare minimum that is required. It has simply gone past the point where unregulated parking can coexist with a high functioning commercial corridor without sacrificing safe walkability, access to our commercial enterprises, and the future of the neighborhood. I think it's more than past time for this to get off the ground, and I hope we can see it through. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate the comments. Robert Serrano, he's been a veteran of all three meetings. Robert, you're up.
Right now.
Hello, guys. I'm a longtime resident of Fishtown here. I live right on Frankfurt Avenue, and as I've stated before, these are very tiny meetings that are happening here. We don't even have 25 people in any of the three meetings we've had. And I feel like a lot of the constituents, thousands of constituents, are left out in the dark. They don't know about it. Even the people who are, let's say, not on social media, like my mom down the street, she hasn't gotten anything talking about this meeting. So a lot of people are left out and they don't know what's going on. So people need to be involved. The other thing is, like I said, the study that was done during the end of the pandemic when people were at home and or learning from home. I was teaching here in Fishtown for Penn Treaty. So I know my car wouldn't move because I didn't have to walk to school, or I taught from here. The other thing is, why isn't the FNA doing meetings or Darrell Clark or Mark Squilla holding meetings with the constituents so that we can have a compromise, a dialogue? That hasn't been done. This feels like a production where, hey, we're going to push this through. It's going to get ramrodded in. We're going to make it happen no matter what. 3 meetings. We had 1 meeting last week that was in conflict with the FNA meeting that happened to be outdoors. And unfortunately, those people either had to make a choice. They're either going to be at this meeting or they're going to be at the FNA meeting. So I thought that was bad in scheduling. And I thought they should have rescheduled that. I don't know. I think we should do things in incremental stages where you should have the maybe try loading zones first for all the people who have businesses, since the bid is like a small number of individuals versus the constituents that are going to be greatly impacted or affected by this. I don't want this to be like one step. You guys give us the residential, then come back and say, it's not working for us. Let's do metered parking. Next thing you know, we're out left out with having to pay for meters. And I don't want to have to pay to, bring my groceries in the house as a PPA person jumps out. And that's one of the things that I'm worried about as well. And where will that money go if the PPA is here? I mean, it seems like a money grab for the PPA. Okay, that's basically it. I just want to know about why is there an FNA meeting for all the constituents? Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Robert. And just to clarify with so certainly the bid and several of the meetings that I went through, the whole procedural history, certainly the ones that we had in 2021 were joint meetings, jointly hosted by us and FNA. Certainly there were in 2021 at least 2 star articles written about that issue where Fishtown Neighbors Association people were actually quoted. And then the Star wrote an article last week about our meetings and then highlighted we're here today. We certainly think we've done the best we can with outreach for all. All right, so here the next order is going to be John Scott, Will Duncan, and then Dennis Boyce. Go ahead, John.
Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Mark, thank you for letting me weigh in again, as always.
Of course.
I'd like to suggest that we take this proposal off the table and work on an updated plan. First, Anne, I've pointed out twice in the last year that your conclusions are flawed and that you count immovable construction barriers as parked cars. You mentioned the 1400 block, which you've defined as Master to Belgrade, but that's actually the 1300 block, and that's where the barriers are. We'd expect occupancy to be near 100%, but your turnover numbers are simply wrong and misleading, and they are contradicted by neighbors' direct observations. And yet, so far, you've ignored any criticism of your study. You haven't responded to that at all. That is offensive. We already deal with enough PPA errors. We don't really need any more of that rammed down our throats. As many have pointed out, these proposals take money out of the hands of neighbors, workers, and business owners and put it in the hands of the PPA instead. Second, you've heard that there are already permit blocks with idling double parked trucks, which PPA simply isn't enforcing. If you're not doing what you've already been tasked to do, why would we expand this? Finally, you did a study, but we still don't have a good answer on who is even parking here in the first place. Are they residents? Are they customers? Are they workers? Are they transit users? Or are they car thieves just leaving cars there? We just don't know. Mark, there's a lot more that the bid could do with its membership to improve the situation without the PPA. For example, there's a fallen tree in a parking spot now for almost a week. There are streeteries that may not be needed anymore or not to the same extent. There are construction barriers for extended periods of time where no construction is imminent. There are broken sidewalks up and down the avenue that discourage the very foot traffic we're all trying to create. You can and should address these things first. Instead, you're basically asking the community and the workers to park somewhere else. I urge everybody to hold off on any changes until a good faith effort has been made to explore alternatives, engage the neighbors ahead of time, and demonstrate some real progress. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Will, you're up.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, John. Haven't seen you at a zoning meeting for a couple months. I know you've been busy, but hope I can see you soon. We got one October 4th if you want to come through. Yeah, so topic at hand, parking. So I'm just speaking. I live on Frankfurt Ave. Talk to just about everyone in my building, 1405 Frankfurt, and everyone has been very much on board with getting regulated parking for a couple reasons. One, when someone visits, they have a friend over, they have a family member visit, that no one can really find parking on Frankfurt Ave. Second, a lot of people are really concerned with pedestrian safety issues. So a lot of times, as a resident there, you notice there's folks who are double parked because there's no turnover. Constantly cars are parked in bus lanes, making it impossible to get on the 25 or 5 safely. And that's a big concern for our residents as well. The last concern for our community is that our basement commercial space has been vacant for a number of years. And we've been told by the broker there that a big contributing factor is, there's some concern, around, being able to get the traffic that would warrant the rents being asked for. And I think that having more turnover with parked cars would help get that commercial space filled, which is honestly is a little bit of a safety issue. It's been tagged before. Of course, Mark always gets his guys out there to fix it up. But we'd really like to get that filled. We really like, pedestrian safety to be improved. And I think, getting regulated parking would really help with that, especially because if you get a parking permit, which is, real easy to do, I think it's $35. You can still park on the street as far as I understand, at least. So, it would make it easier for our residents, for my neighbors, in a whole bunch of ways. So, definitely hear everybody's concerns, but just speaking in my neck of the woods, as a resident on Frankfurt Ave, I think it would be a really big improvement. And everyone I've talked to in my building and around the immediate vicinity thinks so too. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Will. Dennis, come on around.
Thank you.
There you go. Know how this works, right?
No, that's why I'm here.
See your face?
Oh, okay.
There you go. Go.
Dennis Boyce, I'm on the 1300 block of Frankfurt Avenue, and there is little or no turnover, and I've been here for many years, and there are cars that come and park on my block and the other blocks that I walk around on Frankfurt Avenue, and they're there for many days, if not weeks at a time. My assumption is they're not residents of Fishtown. When people do come to see me, they end up going into the neighborhood and taking someone's residential parking spot, in a sense, because they don't have any parking on Frankfurt Avenue. So I really think that some type of regulation is really needed. To another point someone made about the lack of knowledge about this issue, everyone I talk to, and most of the people that I know in Fishtown, all assume we're getting some type of regulated parking. I think that's why they don't bother coming out to say anything. They just assume it's going to happen because it's so badly needed. Just come on the 13, 14, whatever 100 block, 1200 block. And, right now there's a tan car parked in front of my neighbor Phil's house. It's been there for a week. Who knows who owns it? In my walk sometime, I'd see people park on my block and then they walk over and I'd see them again getting on the L. I don't know. I mean, maybe they don't want to pay for parking in their neighborhood, but it really is definitely a problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Very well done. Bob Everett. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Just to go back with a few of the other points that were mentioned. Yes, I feel for the businesses because they obviously want turnaround parking. And to Will's point and John's point, there are a lot of the businesses that, in some people's opinion, are taking advantage of the situation with their deliveries. I mean, if they're all going to ask for loading spots, there still won't be any place to park. So they're going to have to all work together and get maybe one per block and share it. And, you get your delivery now or whenever, because nobody will be able to park at all. And I feel for their employees too, but when I worked downtown, I didn't have any place to park. So I either had to pay or take the public transportation, like we keep hearing them tell us all the visitors are doing, which they're not doing, they're coming in cars. Permit parking, most of the blocks, Riverside of Frankfurt Avenue, all have restricted hour parking already that's been put in place over the last couple of years to try and curtail that from happening, which is why people are now going to Frankfurt Avenue. So I like the idea of the 8 a.m. to midnight, metered or non-metered, but monitored and resident parking overlay. And it would probably be a good idea to combine parts of 10 with 25, so it's all in the same zone. Because sometimes you got to park more than a block away, and I think the overlay for 10 and 25 only allows you one block north or south of Girard. But Ann, you would know better than I, so maybe they could lower 25 down to east of Front, north of, say, Canal. That's it.
Thanks, Bob. Question to Ann, Linda, or Ed, if any one of you, about the zones, because I think, one of the things is we might fall into two different zones. Is
So,
there
Mark-
any remedy for that?
Right, so they are, so some of the blocks are 10 and 25. Any block that comes off of Girard Ave, one block abut, that's what legislation says, one block off of a boundary block, which the boundary block for 10 and 25 in that particular area is Girard Ave. So any block off of Girard Ave, if they already have residential permit parking, it should be 10 and 25, which I'm most definite it is. I mean, if you have a block that isn't 10 and 25 on either side, but it has to be one block off of Girard Ave. And if anything else that you want to change the boundaries, once again, that would have to go through legislation, through your council, city council.
Understood. Anybody else before we sum up? Time to be heard. Remember, we're recording and sending this. If you have something on your mind, we want to hear it. All right, with that, I want to thank everyone for taking the time this evening and the past several evenings and all throughout this process. I'll leave everyone with a couple, just in summation of all of these meetings. Certainly this was an issue, as my good friend Dennis here has been here for a long time, since the 80s. Will tell you, this is not an issue that we just started even in 2021. This was brought back in 2016, hence the study being done. And while we are very thrilled with the growth that we are having all over the place, residentially, commercially, and certainly it adds to our local economy, it adds to our density, it adds to people going to work. But what it also does is takes away parking. And a reminder of those when we're calling out studies and things is they're the professionals who do that, but what we all have are eyes. And we've all experienced it. We all can see that the cars have been there. I mean, we used to joke, there was a car on Parkland Girard Avenue that I guess the owner would go away and would cover it with a tarp. And for 6 months it was there. And, you know, it's funny, but it's sad it's on our quarter because that's one less space that can never be used. And there's no way to make it done because the car is legal. So when I came on board, this was an immediate thing that both I heard from big businesses, our board, and even residents. How do we make these regulations happen? I'm going to kind of amplify what Andy Ortega said, which was, this is the bare minimum. Really is. We really tried to find compromise where we could in the professional recommendations that we received, so that we're giving parking permits to our residents, so they're not going to have to worry about whether timing or meters. We preferred, both us and FNA, not having meters so that no one's employees are not putting out costs. You know, this is not just business people parking there. This is a lot of people using our spaces, some to go downtown, some to park an extra car, whatever it may be. But it's only going to get worse. And, you know, it's incumbent on us as a community to work together. That's what these meetings were for, to allow us to voice those and do those. And I think in moving forward, I think this is certainly can lead to the right direction. And to conclude, why it's important is we are agreeing to do this as a pilot program, so that 6 months into this 8-month program, we can see what the results are. We can see again, if we need to get another study, how is the turnover and occupancy changed? You know, it's a good point because we talked about streeteries, or someone mentioned those. Well, several of them will be going away over time as the harsher regulations are put into place. But as the 2016 recommendation showed, before we had any of that, it didn't matter. So it is important now that we take that step. We take that step together. Diane, we're about to conclude, but you have put your hand up at the last minute. So I'll give you your 2 minutes.
Okay, I just need 1 minute. I have a question then. I recall a zoning meeting from several months ago about the new construction on the other side of Frankfurt Avenue, between the Fillmore and Girard, where the proposal didn't include parking because the general consensus was that no one in the future was going to be driving cars. Can you address that?
Well, I certainly can't adjust because it was probably a Fishtown neighbors meeting.
No, Mark, I remember the case.
I could speak to it really quick.
Oh,
Okay.
If that would be helpful, Mark, but I don't want
well,
to.
please do.
So,
Thank you.
yes,
Thank you,
Diane,
Diane.
the reason that there wasn't parking included in that proposal was because they wanted to have commercial space
I
instead,
remember this.
and that because of the floodplain, they couldn't have underground parking. Obviously, there were a lot of residents though who weren't a fan of that proposal. It was a close vote, but FNA did support that project because the vote of the residents was 32 in support and 25 against. But there were mixed feelings. But the reason that they didn't have parking was because they wanted to have a commercial space rather than included interior parking, and then they couldn't have underground parking because of the floodplain.
Okay, I just suppose it's confusing, or maybe I would even use the word hypocritical, to hear on one hand that we want more density without parking, and then we're increasing that, and then we're talking about parking being a problem. And just to second John Scott's point about the study of at least the 1200 block of Frankfurt Avenue, if I'm not mistaken, those studies were done during COVID when the entire situation was different. Residents, as Robert Serrano said, were working from home over long periods of time. And I think that's something that's still continuing. So I think there were flaws in the study. I just wanted to second that and ask about this more density votes for less parking, and now we have a parking problem. That's it.
Thank you, Dan. Just to clarify that, we don't just have a parking problem, or we wouldn't have been looking into this since 2016. This has been a growing thing and so the issue has been an issue for years. The density continues, and as much as the bid is doing, working with Indigo Bike Share and the Clean Air Council and the Planning Commission to work on alternate modes of transportation, adding Indigo stations, et cetera. You can't tell people who want cars that they can't have them. What we can ensure that our public spaces are continuously turning over so that people that are coming here to live, shop, work, play, have the opportunity to park their cars. Janae, you had your hand up? Do you still have your hand up?
I did. I just had a really quick question. When it comes to our like the regulating of implementing all these, would everything be done at the same time, or would it kind of just be like a step by step? Okay, we're doing this 100 block, we're doing this 100 block, or what's going on with that?
I would assume it's the all at once, Ann?
Yes, it would be all at once. We would do, once again, but we would have to know what you want.
Right, correct.
We wouldn't dictate what we were going to do until, we're told, not told, but you agree on what we should go ahead and regulate.
Okay, and just one more side point with District 25, it's already such a large area that I don't know if extending it more would help us, and that's up to you guys to figure that out. But it seems like it's already a pretty large area where it's big. I've actually spoke with Darrell Clark about that, and we'll see what goes on.
Thank you, Janae.
Mm-hmm.
One last point we talked about, a couple people have made points about, well, the study was done during COVID. And I know I've asked you, Ann, this before. We've just gone through two studies, 5 years apart, one pre-pandemic streetery, one post. Is there anything in your professional opinion that would lead you to think that the parking turnover occupancy situation has improved to the point where you wouldn't recommend regulations in those areas?
Like I said earlier, both were done 5 years apart, and it's still the same, almost the same results. Whether it was streeteries or barricades that they're stating, it was still the same results. No turnover. No one's moving their vehicles.
Thank you, Ann. And to amplify that, I know Chef K is cooking. But, in preparation for our recent event for Fishtown and putting parking flyers out, she actually was able to count cars that she had left it on and cars that remained in the same space for at least over a week or two. And I think there was at least 6 to 10 that were on Frankfurt Avenue that were there when she initially did it, and 2 weeks later were still there. And I just don't know, I'm not sure how that can work for anyone. So again, but everyone's points, we appreciate you. We appreciate your time. We certainly appreciate your input. And we were going to be turning all of your comments over to our elected officials in the PPA tomorrow by sending this recording. We'll make sure it's in our newsletter and posted on social media. Again, we will be, as a bid, we will be reiterating and writing our recommendation. I'd imagine that the Fishtown Neighbors Association will again do the same for the third time. And then we'll go from there. What we made a promise, certainly to our electeds, is if any regulations come to be, before anything happens, we would certainly be happy to host again an informational meeting so that everyone knows what's coming, what to expect, and when to expect it. Having said that, I want to thank you, Ann O'Neill, Linda Bradley, Ed Schaefer from the PPA for all of your time, not just tonight, but throughout this process. We really appreciate you. Also want to thank Steve Lorenz from the Philadelphia Streets Department. Steve was the quiet type tonight, just got to sit and listen, but I appreciate you taking the time, Steve. And And lastly, I just want to thank all of you. Have a great night. And if you have any other questions, feel free to contact me offline at mark@fishtownbid.org. Take care, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you, Mark.